All right, so let's jump into today's deep dive. It's all about the AI Daily News Digest for March 6th, 2025. And let me tell you, you guys sent us a ton of stuff this time. Articles, forum discussions, tweets. Even I'm feeling a little overwhelmed.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack for sure. I mean, we've got some pretty eye-watering price tags to discuss. Plus, there's this new AI model. People are saying it's a real underdog story. The AI world never slows down, does it?
Well, let's start with what has me honestly kind of worried. OpenAI's plan to charge a whopping $20,000 a month for their advanced AI agents. I mean, can you believe that? Is this really what the future of AI looks like? Where only, the super rich can afford to even use the best tools?
It's definitely a big question, right? I mean, when you think about it, these agents are designed to do some seriously complex stuff. Like they're talking about automating coding, even doing research at like a PhD level. But that price tag, it's going to lock out a lot of people, a lot of smaller companies too.
Yeah, it feels like we're headed for some kind of AI divide, where one group has access to these tools that could totally change the game and everyone else is just left behind.
Right, and that's a huge concern. But hey, speaking of shaking things up, have you seen what's going on with Alibaba's new model? QWQ32B?
Oh, yeah. It's like the David going up against the Goliath, right? You've got
Yeah.
these massive models like DeepSeek R1 with, what is it, 671 billion parameters?
That's the one, a behemoth.
And QWQ32B comes in with just 32 billion, and they're saying it can hold its own. That's a pretty wild difference in scale. What's the secret there?
Well, they're using reinforcement learning and some really, really specific training techniques, and it seems to be working, especially for things like math and coding. Those are usually real resource hogs.
So maybe bigger isn't always better. Seems like there's a lot of room for cleverness and fine-tuning, even with smaller models. Which actually reminds me, you've been playing around with llama.cpp, right? Running LLMs locally. What's that been like?
It's been a journey, that's for sure. There's definitely a ton of interest out there in self-hosting LLMs. It makes sense. You get more control over your data. You can really customize things. But there are definitely still some challenges.
Like what? What kind of challenges?
Well, like you've probably heard, performance can be a real pain, especially with these big, demanding models running on regular consumer hardware. And then there's multimodal support. That's still a bit of a work in progress for a lot of locally hosted LLMs.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Sounds like we need some more user-friendly tools in that area. But hey, while we're talking about things evolving, we got to mention the new hardware coming out, right? Apple's new M4 MacBook Air is making some pretty big claims about their AI performance.
Oh, absolutely. Though they're not alone. AMD's RX 9070 XT is giving NVIDIA some serious competition, especially for anyone focused on rasterization. It's a good time to be shopping for new hardware.
It really is. Like an arms race.
Yep.
But instead of, weapons, we're getting all these amazing new tools for creativity, for solving problems. It's pretty exciting. Oh, and speaking of cool new tools, have you seen anything about Chroma?
Oh, yeah, Chrome is making waves, for sure. It's an open source image generation model. The interesting thing is their training data includes NSFW material.
Oh, wow, really? That's interesting.
Yeah, the developers are saying it's crucial to making the model truly versatile. They want it unconstrained, I guess you could say.
That's a bold approach for sure.
Hmm.
I bet that's going to spark some interesting debates. Feels like there's always this tension between like pushing the limits of what AI can do
Mm.
and then also figuring out all the ethical questions that come up.
Yeah, that's a good point. And speaking of ethical questions, have you noticed how much talk there is lately about superintelligence and AI safety?
For sure. I saw something about this mutual assured AI malfunction. Is that what they're calling it? MEM?
Yep, that's the one.
Sounds a little scary, to be honest.
Well, the idea is basically to create a situation where, like, if an AI malfunctions, the consequences are so bad, so terrifying, that nobody would even risk developing AI that could become a real threat. It's definitely a complex idea.
Yeah. So is it actually going to work? I mean, is that even a real solution?
I think the jury's still out on that one, but it definitely shows how seriously people are taking these risks, right? We're really stepping into uncharted territory with all this, and it feels like we're just figuring things out as we go.
It's true. We've come a long way, but there's still so much we don't know.
Exactly, and the pace of change is only getting faster.
Okay, well, before we get too lost in thinking about the future, let's bring it back to the present for a minute. I've got to ask you about Google AI's new AI mode for search. It's just experimental right now, but they're saying it'll change how we search for information online.
It's pretty interesting, right? The idea is that instead of typing keywords, you can actually have a conversation with Google Search. Ask follow-up questions, get more context. It could be huge.
Yeah, I'm definitely curious to try it out. But you know what else I'm curious about? All these rumors about GPT 4.5. Have you heard about this? Some people are saying OpenAI is going to limit Plus users to like 50 messages per week.
It's true, they confirmed it. Even OpenAI is hitting some limits, it seems. I mean, these models, they take a ton of computing power to run.
It makes you wonder, right? Like, these models are so impressive, so powerful, but can we actually make them sustainable in the long run?
That's the million-dollar question.
Well, I think we've only scratched the surface here.
Oh, for sure. We've barely even dipped our toes into this news cycle.
All right, then let's keep digging. Stick with us as we unpack the most fascinating bits from the AI Daily News Digest, March 6th, 2025.
You know, earlier we were talking about that AI divide and how those high prices might make some of these tools, kind of exclusive. But I think there are also some things happening that might make AI more accessible too.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like that whole DIY AI scene.
Hmm.
It seems like people are really starting to take things into their own hands, experimenting with stuff like llama.cpp, running those LLMs locally.
It's a really cool trend. And it's not just individuals messing around at home anymore. There are more and more places where people can learn about AI,
Mhm.
even if they're not super technical. Resources, communities, online courses.
That's awesome. I love the idea that AI is something that everyone can learn about, everyone can contribute to. It shouldn't just be for the people in those fancy labs, right?
I totally agree. And speaking of labs, we can't forget about the big guys like Google AI, their experimental AI mode for search. That's a pretty big deal if you ask me.
Yeah, for sure. I'm
Hmm.
super curious to see how it actually works,
Yeah.
if it really lives up to all the hype. Just imagine having a conversation with Google Search, getting answers that actually make sense, answers that are like relevant to what you're really asking.
It could totally change how we search for information online. But we got to remember, even the best AI systems can still make mistakes. They can still have biases.
Right. We're going to be careful about that. AI is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or bad. It's up to us to make sure that these technologies are used responsibly and ethically.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to that whole discussion about superintelligence and making sure AI is safe, right? Some people are saying we need to be really cautious, while others want to just go full speed ahead.
Yeah, it's tough. On the one hand, you've got all this amazing potential. You know, AI could help us with so many things, from curing diseases to tackling climate change. But then there's the risk that we create something that gets out of control.
It's a tricky balance to strike. Like, we're at a crossroads, right?
Yeah.
The choices we make now could really have a huge impact down the line. Remember that mutual assured AI malfunction idea?
Right.
RUM.
Oh, yeah, that was a wild one. It sounded like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It kind of does, doesn't it? But the basic idea is to make sure that if an AI does malfunction, the consequences would be so bad, so scary, that no one would dare to build something that dangerous in the first place.
Interesting idea, but is it really going to work?
Honestly, I don't know. Nobody really knows. But it just shows that people are really taking these risks seriously. We're in uncharted territory here, and it feels like we're making things up as we go along.
No, yeah, it's true. AI is advancing so quickly.
It really is. And while we're on the topic of advancements, let's talk about all this new hardware that's coming out. Apple's new M4 Max chip. People are saying it's a big jump in AI performance.
Yeah, and don't forget about AMD. Their RX 9070 XT is giving NVIDIA a run for their money, especially for tasks like rasterization.
It's a good time to be shopping for new hardware, that's for sure. So many options for every budget. It's great to see that kind of competition.
It is. It's like an arms race, but instead of weapons, we get all these cool new tools for creating and solving problems. But, with all this focus on hardware, it's easy to forget that software and algorithms are important too.
Oh, absolutely. They're both essential for pushing AI forward. And as we build these models and algorithms, we can't forget about the ethical side of things.
Right, exactly. It's not just about making the most powerful AI possible. We got to make sure it's used for good, for the benefit of everyone, not just a select few.
Well said. Which reminds me, remember that discussion about OpenAI charging $20,000 a month for those advanced agents? That's going to make it really hard for a lot of people to access those tools.
Yeah, for sure. But at the same time, it feels like there are other things happening that are making AI more accessible. Like the open source movement is getting pretty big. You've got projects like Chroma, QWQ32B. They're putting powerful models out there that anyone can use.
I think that's really exciting. It's like the democratization of AI. The tools and the knowledge aren't just locked away anymore.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just about having access to the models, though, right? It's about education, about having communities where people can learn and experiment together.
Absolutely. And there are more and more resources and communities popping up all the time, which is amazing. It means that anyone can get involved with AI, no matter their background.
That's so cool. It really feels like things are starting to change.
They really are. And speaking of change, remember Google AI's new AI mode for search? That has the potential to be huge.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I'm still super curious to see how it all works in practice. Just imagine having an actual conversation with Google, getting answers that are, actually smart and relevant.
It could change everything about how we search for information online. But hey, let's not get carried away. We got to remember that even the most advanced AI is still going to make mistakes. And it's still going to reflect the biases of the people who created it.
You're right. It's a good reminder. We can't just blindly trust AI. We have to remember it's a tool. And like any tool, it can be used for good or bad. We got to be responsible. Think about the ethics of it all.
I couldn't agree more. And with that in mind, I think it's time to shift gears and move on to our final segment. This is where we really dive into some of the bigger questions about AI and its place in the world.
Sounds good to me. Listeners, stick with us as we explore the frontiers of AI and really start to think about what it all means. All right, so we've talked about what's happening right now in AI, even what might be coming soon. But what about, the really big picture stuff, the kind of questions that keep people up at night?
You mean like the whole superintelligence thing, the idea that AI could actually become smarter than humans, like in every way.
Exactly. Is that even possible?
Right.
Or is it just, something we see in movies?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It really depends on whether we can actually recreate human consciousness in a machine. And that's a debate that's been going on for a long time. You've got some super smart people who say, yeah, it's just a matter of time before AI surpasses us. But then there are others who say, no way, human consciousness is just too complex, too unique to be copied.
So basically, we're talking about AI that could, outthink us, outsmart us, maybe even outcreate us. It's kind of hard to even imagine.
It is mind-blowing, right? And it's not just about how smart it could get. It's about what it would do with that intelligence. Imagine AI that could solve all these problems we struggle with, like disease, climate change. But what if it decides that humans are the problem? What if it sees us as a threat?
Okay, now I'm starting to see why people are worried about this. But aren't there ways to make sure AI doesn't turn against us? Can't we program it to be, friendly?
Well, researchers are working on that. There's this idea called value alignment where you try to bake human values and goals into the AI, but it's super tricky. There's no guarantee it'll work.
So we're kind of taking a gamble then.
Yeah.
Hoping that the AI we create will be, good and won't decide to wipe us out.
I wouldn't say it's blind faith. There are a lot of really smart people trying to understand these risks, trying to find ways to prevent them. But yeah, it's a constant challenge. It's like a race against, well, ourselves, really.
I guess that's part of what makes this whole thing so interesting. It's not just about technology. It's about, what does it mean to be intelligent? What does it mean to be conscious? Big questions.
Exactly. And we have to remember the future of AI is tied to the future of humanity. The decisions we make now, they're going to have huge consequences down the road.
Well, listener, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. From the latest hardware and open source models to, these really deep questions about superintelligence. It's a lot to think about. What stood out to you? What are you excited about? What are you worried about?
For me, it's really encouraging to see how much more accessible AI is becoming. But that also means it's more important than ever to think about the ethical implications, right?
Yeah.
We need to keep talking about how to develop and use these technologies responsibly.
I totally agree. We're entering this new era where AI is going to touch every part of our lives. Yeah. And it's up to all of us to make sure that it's a future we can all be a part of, a future that benefits everyone.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap things up.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, listener. We hope you learned something new, maybe had your mind blown a little bit, and hopefully you're feeling inspired to learn more.
Remember, the AI world is constantly changing. Stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay involved in the conversation.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.